Hi, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join me on this week's video. In this week's video, we're continuing with session number 5 of our new series entitled The QME's Crystal Ball, and I have a fascinating discussion for you today, one that I'm certain is going to change your very next face-to-face evaluation. It's going to change not only the procedures that you employ in your face-to-face evaluation, but it's certain to positively impact the opinions and conclusions at the end of your evaluation if you will simply follow the procedures that I suggest to you in today's discussion. Now, before we get into today's discussion, let's just briefly review where we've come from so far in this program. And let's begin by reiterating and refreshing our own memories as to what is the philosophy of this program. The philosophy of this program has to do with truth and accuracy in the QME evaluation. Let me say that again. It has to do with truth and accuracy. Truth and accuracy. And part of the philosophy of this program hinges around the expectations of the parties involved in your case. Each of the parties involved in your case is depending on you as a qualified medical evaluator, is counting on you as a qualified medical evaluator, is relying on you as a qualified medical evaluator to be accurate in your opinions and conclusions. So the injured worker who is potentially injured in the course of his employment, who needs necessary benefits for medical treatment and temporary and permanent disability benefits, is counting on you to be accurate with your opinions and conclusions. The employer who pays the premiums for the workers' compensation insurance coverage is counting on you to be accurate. The claims administrator is counting on you to be accurate. The applicant and defense attorneys are counting on you to be accurate and truthful and precise in your opinions and conclusions in each and every case. The stakes on these cases are so high that each of the parties look to us as qualified medical evaluators to resolve disputed issues and to resolve those disputes in a manner that's accurate. That's accurate. That's an actual representation of the truth. That's an accurate representation of the examinee's need or lack of need, or qualification or lack of qualification for workers' compensation benefits. The stakes are extremely high for all of the parties, and therefore it's essential that you take to heart the message of this course in this program, and that is, it's absolutely critical that we render opinions and conclusions that are truthful and accurate so that all of the parties are simultaneously properly served by the qualified medical evaluation report. And so in an effort to attain the lofty ideal and the lofty standard of truthfulness and accuracy in the qualified medical evaluation, we began this program with a series of tools that you can use when you encounter those gray areas, those difficult areas, those areas where it's not possible to be absolutely certain, but those areas that are critical in swinging benefit dollars, either for the examinee or closing down benefits for those examinees who do not qualify for workers' compensation benefits. So I'm providing you in this program with a series of tools that you can employ in helping you make those difficult determinations. So we spent our first 2 sessions in this program talking about how to obtain an accurate and truthful history as to the presence or the absence of an industrial injury. And this is critical in this day and age when we have so many workers' compensation claims that are denied claims. There's denied claims that come to us qualified medical evaluators for a determination on AOE and COE. So imagine the gravity and the hope and expectations that each of the parties have on the qualified medical evaluator in a dispute that involves AOE, COE. Imagine the plight of the injured worker who is potentially on the brink of either receiving necessary workers' compensation benefits or being denied workers' compensation benefits based upon the qualified medical evaluator's AOE, COE determination. It's critical that we provide an accurate and truthful opinion on the presence or absence of an industrial injury, even in those cases where it's difficult to actually know whether or not an actual industrial injury occurred or not. And I gave you some tools as to how to be 99.99% accurate on your AOE COE determination every single time, as if you magically had your own omnipotent power or your own crystal ball. In sessions 3, we talked about the necessity of obtaining an accurate, relevant medical history and how an accurate, relevant medical history applies to your opinions and conclusions on many of the disputed issues, such as AOE COE, such as the presence and extent of permanent impairment, and number 3, as to your apportionment, approximate percentages. And I gave you a little motivation to spur you to improve your relevant medical history section in your report by reminding you that the complexity factors under CCR 9795 richly reward us as qualified medical evaluators for obtaining an accurate, relevant medical history. In other words, we are spiffed. We receive a spiff. We receive a complexity factor. We receive a relevant medical history. An accurate, relevant medical history gets us one step closer to an ML 104, which is the highest billing level provided for under CCR 9795. So the legislature and the Division of Workers' Compensation found it necessary and imperative in their wisdom to motivate us to dig for the relevant medical history, because the details from the relevant medical history are critical to the important opinions and conclusions later on in your report. And then in our last session, session number 4, we talked about the physical examination of your injured worker and how to determine in the physical examination which of your physical examination findings represent true positive objective findings. And we summarized that session by stating that a true positive objective finding is much different than simply a report from the examinee that they have pain with a certain physical examination maneuver. No, true positive physical examination objective findings have some aspect of the flexor withdrawal response associated with them. And it's the reflexive response that's the true positive objective finding. Much as reflex testing of deep tendon reflexes is a truly objective test that cannot be manipulated by the examinee, the flexor withdrawal reflex is a reflexive response to pain that cannot be manipulated by the examinee, and that represents the true positive objective finding. Anything less than a physical examination finding that contains some aspect of the flexor withdrawal reflex is simply a subjective finding versus a true positive objective finding. Okay? And knowledge of this and awareness of this flexor withdrawal response helps you as the qualified medical evaluator determine the examinee's true condition despite the examinee's subjective statements of pain and or limitations to activities of daily living. Okay? And now that creates the perfect transition for today's session. And in today's session, I want to help you in your history taking of the examinee. And I want to give you some tools that you can employ to arrive at some accurate and truthful determinations as to your examinee's limitations with activities of daily living. So we're going to explore in today's session the activities of daily living assessment. And so with no further ado, let's begin today's session. Okay, so let's begin. And today we're talking about the activities of daily living assessment. Now, as you know, activities of daily living are a big deal because the AMA guides tell us that when an injury results in limitations to activities of daily living, that injury qualifies for a permanent impairment rating, at least if the examinee has limitations in activities of daily living at the maximum medical improvement point in time. Or I should say, here in California, when the examinee is determined to be permanent and stationary, if at that point he still has limitations to activities of daily living as a result of an industrial injury, that qualifies for a permanent impairment rating. Now, on the other hand, and at the opposite end of the spectrum, when an examinee has an impairment, but that impairment does not cause limitations to activities of daily living, that impairment does not qualify for a permanent impairment rating. So it's essential that we as qualified medical evaluators ascertain with accuracy what are the examinee's true limitations, if any, what are the true limitations to activities of daily living. Now, I want to put this into a little bit of context. I want to put the contribution of the activities of daily living to the permanent impairment rating in a bit of context by telling you a little bit about California and how California ranks compared to neighboring states and states all across the nation, even considering Alaska, when it comes to permanent impairment or permanent disability ratings. And I want to share some statistics from you from a recent 2017 Workers' Compensation Insurance Rating Bureau report, which was entitled The State of the System. And as far as I know, this is the most current report because it takes time to compile these statistics. And as this is being recorded in 2019, we'll probably next get statistics from 2018 here at some point shortly. But as far as I know, this is the most recent and the latest statistical findings. Well, according to the Workers' Compensation Insurance Rating Bureau, they tell us that California continues to have the highest rates in the country, the highest workers' compensation premium rates in the country. Now let me just elaborate on this for a second. There's 50 states in the United States, and California ranks 50th, dead last, at the bottom of the list in terms of the rates being charged to employers for workers' compensation premiums. California is in dead last position, 50 out of 50. Well, you might ask yourself, well, what's the reason for that? And the WCIRB tells us that the reasons for that include, number one, there's a high frequency of permanent disability claims, and we're going to talk about this in today's session. What that means is that in California, more claims than in any other state go on to receive an award or a rating for permanent disability than any other state. Now, you might ask yourself, why is that? Are injuries in California any more disabling or severe than injuries in Kansas or in Illinois or in Arkansas? What is it about California injuries that cause so many of them, a high frequency of them, to go on to a permanent disability status? Well, this high frequency of permanent disability status is a bit perplexing, considering that California also has the highest medical costs per claim, and number two, they have a more prolonged pattern of medical treatments than in any other state in the entire United States. So imagine this, in California, the treatments go on longer than in any other state in the Union, and the costs for medical care are higher than any other state in the Union. And despite all this expensive and protracted medical treatment, despite all of this, many, the highest frequency of claims in the entire country then go on to receive a permanent disability or a permanent impairment rating. And you might ask yourself, wait a minute, these are some contradictory statistics. You would think that examinees that go through expensive medical care and for lengthy and protracted medical care would get well, but for some reason in California, we have a high frequency of claims that go on to receive a permanent disability award or rating. In fact, we have the highest rate in the country. In other words, California ranks dead last. So to reiterate, California rates our workers' compensation premium. These are the premiums that are charged to employers. And many of you doctors are employers, so you're familiar with the high rates being charged to insure your employees for workers' compensation benefits. In California, permanent disability claim frequency is the highest in the country, and this has in many cases to do with the qualified medical evaluators' opinions and conclusions, especially as relates to activities of daily living. Many qualified medical evaluators fail to do an accurate activities of daily living assessment, and so they provide for permanent disability ratings, number one, that are elevated and escalated and not accurate to the examinee's true condition, and then number two, they provide for permanent impairment ratings for examinees who actually do not have true limitations to activities of daily living. So let's talk now about how to do an accurate assessment of activities of daily living. Okay, so then actually, how do you do an activities of daily living assessment that will help you arrive at a determination as to whether or not the examinee has or does not have actual limitations to activities of daily living? Well, many doctors in assessing activities of daily living simply use a checkbox form that they send to the examinee prior to the face-to-face evaluation, or sometimes they provide this to the examinee at the face-to-face evaluation, where the examinee goes down a list of activities of daily living, and hopefully this list is derived from the AMA guides. And the examinee simply checks off the activities that they have apparently limitations with, and I'm not convinced that examinees actually know what a limitation to an activity of daily living actually is, but the examinee simply checks the box on the checkbox form, and the qualified medical evaluator reviews the checkbox form and assesses that form and assumes that that form is a representation of the examinee's true limitations to activities of daily living. Now, some qualified medical evaluators take this a little farther, and they take the checkbox form and they review the checkbox form with the examinee at the face-to-face evaluation. And this is one step that if you use a checkbox form, you can employ this step, which is reviewing the form with the examinee at the face-to-face evaluation and revising the examinee's responses to promote accuracy in the examinee's responses. Now, my suggestion to you, and it's my opinion, that the activities of daily living assessment is necessary and is required that you do this in the face-to-face evaluation as part of your interview of the examinee. Since the activities of daily living, since limitations to activities of daily living are as important in arriving at your permanent impairment opinion as the physical exam. In other words, the activities of daily living is as important as your findings on physical exam in arriving at an accurate permanent impairment rating. Since it's so important, it's critical that you do this in a deliberate fashion in the face-to-face evaluation with the examinee, much as you do your physical examination on the examinee physically in the face-to-face evaluation. So the activities of daily living must be done on an interactive basis as part of your interview with the examinee. Now, the activities of daily living and your examinee's capacity for performing activities of daily living can be assessed by you as a qualified medical evaluator in several different ways. And there's several different tools that you're going to use that are going to contribute to your composite opinion. Your composite opinion. In other words, you have all these different sources of information coming to you as the qualified medical evaluator, and then you're going to take all of these sources of information as a composite group of information, and you're going to arrive at a conclusion as to whether or not the examinee actually has or does not have limitations to activities of daily living. So some of the sources of information that you're going to include in your composite picture of the examinee are going to include your observations of the examinee in and around the examination area, in and around the office, in and around the parking lot if you have a chance to observe the examinee. In other words, in considering the totality of your observations of the examinee, you're going to be assessing those observations, assessing the examinee for his capacity to perform various activities of daily living. And there's many different activities of daily living that you can conclude by simply observing the examinee. So, for example, you can arrive at a conclusion as to the examinee's capacity for standing, or their capacity for walking, or their capacity for sitting, or their capacity for using the upper extremities in various activities in and around the examination room. So your observations of the examinee, these are referred to as casual observations. Your casual observations of the examinee are going to contribute to your overall conclusion regarding activities of daily living. Number two, and this is probably going to be a unique consideration for you, and that has to do with the social history that you obtain from the examinee. And I'm going to give you some suggestions as to how to obtain a social history from the examinee that provides you great insight into their capacity on a day-to-day basis for performing activities of daily living. And I'm sure this will be a novel addition to your very next evaluation. Third, we're going to employ symptom questionnaires in helping us arrive at a true picture of the examinee's limitations to activities of daily living. And I know many of you use symptom questionnaires, and I'm going to give you some suggestions as to how to make those symptom questionnaires a more accurate tool for you in arriving at your activities of daily living conclusions. And then finally, I'm going to suggest to you that you interactively interview the examinee in the face-to-face evaluation about each and every activity of daily living that's described in the AMA guides. And many doctors use activities of daily living scales, scores, and questionnaires from other sources other than the AMA guides. But I'm going to suggest that you restrict your discussion of activities of daily living specifically to those that are described in the AMA guides, because they're fairly comprehensive and they cover most of the typical activities of daily living that an examinee would encounter on a daily basis. So, and I'm going to share with you exactly how to go through those activities of daily living to arrive at accurate conclusions regarding the examinee's limitations or lack of limitations to activities of daily living. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit now in our next discussion about symptom questionnaires. And before we get to the symptom questionnaires, let's just briefly touch upon number one and number two sources of data that you're going to rely upon in arriving at your composite conclusion regarding the examinee's activities of daily living. And here, let's talk about observation, and then I'll share a couple of ideas with you regarding how to obtain an accurate social history. So when it comes to observing your examinee, you're going to have probably several hours of opportunity to observe the examinee as the examinee interacts with you in and around the examination area. And as you observe the examinee, you're going to be observing the examinee for their nonverbal forms of communication. So you can think of the examinee's communication as including both verbal forms of communication and nonverbal forms of communication. The verbal forms are all the things that the examinee says, and you can consider those to be subjective factors or subjective forms of communication, whereas the nonverbal aspect of the examinee's communication is a much more objective insight into the examinee's true condition. So there are many aspects that you can observe, many aspects of the examinee's capacity for performing activities of daily living that you can observe in casual observation in and around the examination room. So for example, you can observe the examinee's capacity for standing. You can observe the injured worker's capacity for sitting. You can observe the injured worker's capacity for gesturing and movements with the upper extremity. You can observe the examinee's capacity for sitting with the hips and knees bent to 90 degrees. You can observe many aspects of the examinee's condition simply by casual observation and simply by observing their nonverbal forms of communication. Now, what you want to pay particular attention for is the presence or absence of pain behaviors. Pain behaviors are another component of examinee nonverbal communication. All of the pain behaviors are nonverbal forms of communication. So facial grimacing is a nonverbal communication that when it's present and when it's bona fide facial grimacing will give you some insight as to the examinee's true condition. When the examinee, for example, reports pain with certain examination maneuvers but facial grimacing is absent, that gives you some insight as to their capacity for performing that activity. And this is just one piece of information that goes into your composite calculation for limitations or absence of limitations to activities of daily living. Holding or supported affecting body parts or body areas gives you some insight into the examinee's true condition. Limping or distorted gait would be a true positive objective finding for a lower extremity or a spinal painful condition. When the examinee reports lower extremity pain, such as knee pain, ankle pain, leg pain, muscle weakness, that is not accompanied by limping or distorted gait, it tells you that whatever the pain the examinee is having, it does not affect their ability to perform the activity of daily living of walking. So subjective complaints in the absence of a true positive pain behavior, such as limping or distorted gait, tells you that the examinee may have subjective symptoms, they may have pain, but the pain doesn't rise to the level of an impairment because it does not impact the activity, which is walking. It does not impact the activity, which is the cause of the pain, which results in a 0% impairment opinion. Okay? Frequent shifting of posture of position, extremely slow movements, sitting with a rigid posture, moving in a guarded or protective fashion. All of these are things that you can observe casually simply as you interview the examinee or as the examinee goes through their physical examination maneuvers. And as you observe the examinee both inside and outside of the examination room, you want to always ask yourself, what's objective here? What's objective here? So let me give you an example. Many times our examinees report to us tremendous difficulties with their painful condition and therefore tremendous difficulties with activities of daily living. And as they tell you these subjective statements, you want to ask yourself, what's objective here? As you look at the examinee, what's objective? Well, what's objective is the examinee's here. So whatever difficulty they had in getting here, they're here. Objectively, they're here. The difficulties did not significantly interfere with their capacity to arrive here because they're here. When you look at the examinee, you can see whether or not they are fully dressed or not. Fully dressed is a positive objective finding for the ability to dress oneself. So as you observe the examinee, you can observe their dress. For females, is their makeup put on? Is their hair done? Is their attire appropriate? Is the shirt tucked in? Is the belt secured? Are the shoelaces tied? These are all objective findings that give you some insight into the examinee's capacity for at least dressing themselves and the many activities involved with dressing oneself, such as pushing, pulling, reaching, bending over to tie shoes, etc. Always ask yourself, what's objective here? When an examinee expresses moaning during a physical examination maneuver, Ask yourself, what's objective here? Moaning, as you see, moaning is a subjective, nonverbal form of communication. When an examinee moans as they bend over to touch their toes, ask yourself, what's objective? And what's objective is they touched their toes. So despite the subjective complaint, the subjective communication, the subjective expression of a pain behavior, objectively, whatever pain the examinee is having did not interfere with the activity that caused the pain, which was bending over to touch the toes. And so this gives you tremendous insight if you'll just simply ask yourself, what's objective here? How about examinees that present with a cane, a cervical collar, or other sort of assistive device? Ask yourself, what's objective here? What's objective here? Why don't you go ahead and take a look at the cane? Why don't you take a look at the collar? Take a look at the objective device and determine what is the assistive device telling you. For example, when you look at a cane, you can look at the tip of the cane and assess the cane for wear. You can look at the handle of the cane and assess for frequency of use of the cane by examining the handle of the cane. You would look at the cane itself for scratches, nicks, abrasions, wear, tear, to get an assessment, an objective assessment as to how often that cane is being employed. Always ask yourself, what's objective here? Stooping while walking gives you an indication as to the examinee's true condition, and any other observation that you can make of the examinee, always ask yourself, what's objective here? And true limitations to activities of daily living will manifest and will accompany the examinee's subjective complaints when those subjective complaints, and only when those subjective complaints, cause an interference with the activity. So subjective complaints without interfering with the activity that's reported to cause those complaints does not qualify as a true limitation to an activity of daily living. So limitations to activities of daily living must be distinguished by pain with activities of daily living. Many times when you interview examinees about their limitations to activities of daily living, they will tell you that they have pain or that they have difficulty with performing the activity of daily living, and that is not a true limitation to the activity of daily living if they're able to complete the activity of daily living. Okay? So always have a keen eye in observing your examinee both in and outside of the examination room, and always, always, always ask yourself, what's truly objective here? Okay? So let's talk a little bit now about how the social history relates to your overall conclusion regarding the examinee's activities of daily living. Now, when obtaining the social history, many qualified medical evaluators do this differently. Some qualified medical evaluators don't obtain a social history, and some qualified medical evaluators do obtain a social history, and they have various methods for doing so. So here I have included for you a typical template for obtaining some insight into the examinee's life circumstances and their living situation. And the typical social history includes some questions as to where they live, whether or not the examinee is married, whether or not the examinee has children and the ages of those children, whether or not the examinee is single, whether or not they're married, whether or not they're divorced. And I like these questions in the social history because it gives you some insight as to the examinee's living situation and life circumstances. So for example, if the examinee is married and has children, it may be that some of those children are not yet in school, and the examinee is charged with the responsibility of taking care of those children while at home on total temporary disability. And this gives you some insight into their capacity for activities of daily living, because as you all know, if you've had children, that is, caring for children can sometimes be strenuous and physical in nature. So this gives you at least some insight, and you can explore some of those circumstances involved with caring for children with them in this section of your report. For examinees that have school-age children, sometimes the examinee is responsible for taking the children to and from school. And this gives you some insight into the examinee's ability to walk, if he walks with the children to and from school. It gives you some idea as to the distance that they're able to walk, if they do indeed walk to and from the school. If the examinee drives the children to and from school, this gives you some insight as to their ability to drive and their ability to get up and get out of the house on time and report to appointments and to respond to schedules on time. In other words, this gives you tremendous insight that can be obtained no other way than taking an inside look into the life of the examinee outside of the examination room. So I love these types of questions. Other types of questions such as are you a member of a church or are you a member of any clubs can give you some insight into the examinee's activities of daily living. For example, if the examinee goes to church, they may be involved in singing in the choir. If they sing in the choir, you might ask them if they stand while they're singing, or is he required to be able to sit while singing in the choir. Some churches, some congregations require genuflecting at the knee as part of the spiritual observation. And so if your examinee is able to genuflect at the knee and get up and down from church pews, this gives you some insight into the capacity for performing activities of daily living outside of what you can observe of them in the face-to-face evaluation. Finally, some qualified medical evaluators obtain some other questions in the social history, such as smoking, such as alcohol intake, such as using social drugs. In my experience, many examinees do not respond accurately or truthfully to these types of questions. And other questions such as have you ever been convicted of a felony, or these other questions, in my opinion, don't have any place in the qualified medical evaluation because it's really not relevant to the opinions and conclusions of the report, and don't provide any additional insight into the examinee's capacity for activities of daily living. Now, probably the most important line of questioning that you can use with the examinee in the social history section of your report is to have the examinee take you through what I refer to as a typical day. And this especially applies to examinees who are home on total temporary disability and who are not working. So I typically phrase this question as follows. Okay, Mr. Jones, so now that you're not working, tell me what a typical day is like in your life. So in other words, I want you to take me through a typical day and share with me what you do during a typical day. So for example, what time do you get up in the morning? And have the examinee take you through in as much detail as possible their activities from the moment that they get up in the morning to the moment that they lay their head down at nighttime to go to sleep. And you want to get as much detail as possible from the examinee almost on an hour-by-hour basis. And this will give you tremendous insight as to the examinee's activities of daily living. So for example, the examinee may tell you that, well, I get up at around 6 a.m. and I make some coffee and I have some breakfast with my wife and children. And then I walk my children to school. They need to be to school at 8:30 a.m. So we typically leave at 8:10 and I get them there at 8:30, and that tells you that from 8:10 to 8:30 and then again from 8:30 to 8:50 the examinee is able to be upright, weight-bearing, and walking, and this gives you tremendous insight into the examinee's capacity for activities of daily living. The examinee will tell you, then I come home and I don't do much around the house. I do a little bit of cleanup. My wife goes to work at 9, and so I do a few chores around the house, and then I'll do some reading, and I have to pick up the kids. at 3 o'clock at school, so I'll walk to school and get the kids. Sometimes they play around at the park, and I watch them play at the park, and have the examinee take you through hour by hour the activities that they go through on a typical daily basis, including what time they have supper, what they do after supper, and what time they go to bed. And this will give you tremendous insight that can be obtained no other way in the face-to-face evaluation with the examinee. And what this tells you is that examinees typically have fairly busy days, even when they're off work on total temporary disability. Now, if the examinee is not able to perform these activities, that will become elucidated to you in this social history section of your interviewing with the examinee. So this is a tremendous tool that will allow you to ascertain the examinee's limitations or absence of limitations with activities of daily living. Other lines of questioning that you may use in the social history section of your report is, do you do any chores during the day? Do you do any errands during the day? Do you prepare food for the family during the day? Do you take any naps during the day? Okay, so examinees who have loss of sleep due to pain, due to medications, what have you, these are examinees who you would typically expect would need to make up that lost sleep time with some naps during the day. And so if the examinee reports that they do take naps during the day, that would support and fortify their statements to you of loss of sleep due to pain. Okay, so this is a tremendous, tremendous tool combined with your observations of the examinee that will give you some nonverbal indications as to their capacity for activities of daily living. Okay, so with those two sections, those two types of information sources established, let's now talk about some documents and questionnaires that you can employ in the face-to-face evaluation, and talk about how to employ those to arrive at a true and accurate understanding of the examinee's limitations. Okay, so here's a list of some of the typical symptom questionnaires that can be employed in the qualified medical evaluation. And we use these questionnaires such as the pain drawing diagram, such as the revised Oswestry low back questionnaire, such as the disability of the arm, shoulder, and hand questionnaire, such as the neck disability index, such as the pain-related impairment questionnaire. And we have all these questionnaires that we use to determine how the examinee's painful condition impacts their various activities of daily living. Now, what's important about all of these questionnaires, in my opinion, is that these questionnaires be completed in the face-to-face evaluation with the examinee. And typically, I like to do these right before the physical examination. So this sort of serves as a transition between the active interview process and the physical examination. So you would provide these to the examinee right before the examination, give them a chance to complete the symptom questionnaires, and then you can take a break and go on to the physical examination. And that's just one suggestion. Many doctors do these in many different ways. But what's important with regards to symptom questionnaires is that you review the symptom questionnaires interactively with the examinee to arrive at responses on the questionnaires that are truthful and accurate. Now, some examinees will understate their limitations to activities of daily living on these questionnaires, and some examinees will overstate their limitations with activities of daily living. So, for example, it's my experience that typically most examinees will overstate their limitations with activities of daily living for a couple of reasons, one of which is that they don't understand what a true limitation to the activity of daily living actually consists of, and many times they're simply reporting that they have pain with the activity of daily living. But for example, I recently had an examinee who completed a revised Oswestry low back questionnaire, And on the questionnaire, he indicated two things that I felt I must follow up with. Number one, he indicated that he could stand for only a limited period of time. I think he said I can stand no more than 10 minutes before pain causes me problems with standing. And he also indicated that he could sit for no more than 20 minutes. So when I saw those responses on the questionnaire, I interviewed the examinee further, and I stated, Mr. Smith, you indicated here that you can stand no more than 10 or 20 minutes without lower back pain. Is that correct? And he said, yes, that's correct. And I reminded him that prior to the evaluation, we together stood outside in the parking lot for 40 minutes together while waiting for the examining office to open for business at 9 a.m. In other words, we stood together talking and chatting out in the parking lot for 40 minutes, timed 40 minutes. And he was observed to have no difficulty with standing in the parking lot, and I observed this while we were in the parking lot. And when I questioned him about this, he said, well, out in the parking lot, I had lower back pain, but I was simply being polite because you're the doctor and I didn't want to offend you by asking to go sit down. I was simply being polite. So again, I asked myself, what's objective here? What's objective here? He subjectively told me that he was having pain and that he did want to sit down. But on an objective basis, I concluded that he can stand for 40 minutes because I observed him to stand for 40 minutes. Similarly, I questioned him about his capacity for sitting, and he indicated that he could sit for no more than 20 minutes. And I questioned him and I said, but Mr. Smith, we've been sitting together for an hour and a half. That's 90 minutes. We've been sitting uninterruptedly for 90 minutes. At which point he realized that some of his responses to the symptom questionnaires were exaggerated, and we worked interactively to come up with responses that were more accurate and a more truthful representation of his true condition. So it's important that you not simply accept these symptom questionnaires at face value, because that would simply represent an examinee's subjective response, and we want to attempt to make these questionnaires more objective when possible, and one way to do that is to work interactively with the examinee in completing the questionnaires. Okay, so now when we use these questionnaires, we have to remember that these questionnaires are sometimes limited and sometimes have mixed value to us, because many times the symptom questionnaires describe limitations to activities of daily living that we as the qualified medical evaluators have no way to be able to observe or to verify. So let's talk a little bit about that.
I place more value on the face-to-face assessment of the activities of daily living. And I want to go into a procedure now for you to use and for you to integrate into your formal face-to-face assessment of the impact of the painful condition on your examinee's ability to perform activities of daily living. Now, the AMA guides, they discuss activities of daily living on page 4, and there's basically 8 different categories described. They are: number 1, self-care and personal hygiene activities; number 2, communication activities; number 3 is physical activities; number 4 is sensory function activities; number 5 is non-specialized hand activities; number 6 is travel activities; number 7 is sexual activities; and number 8 is sleep activities. And I want to go into now an example of how you would do an activities of daily living assessment, considering first of all, these self-care and personal hygiene activities. And then we will extrapolate that procedure to the other categories of activities of daily living that are described on page 4 of the AMA guides. Now, the activities of daily living assessment requires us as qualified medical evaluators to translate the reported impact of the injury, condition, or pain as it's described by the examinee on the ability to complete activities of daily living into language that can be used to determine the presence or absence of permanent impairment as a result of the injury, as a result of the condition, or as a result of the pain. And one way to do this is to take the examinee on a journey through the activities of daily living categories, while you as the evaluator mentally assign a rating of minimal, slight, moderate, or severe to the description given by the examinee. So let's consider the example of this assessment as it relates to self-care and personal hygiene in the case of a person with reported lower back and right leg pain. For example, a lumbar sprain strain injury with reported radiculopathy. So how would the activities of daily living assessment, at least as relates to self-care and personal hygiene, go? Well, this is a following example of a hypothetical case and some sample dialogue, and this is an exercise for you doctors to mentally assign, silently assign in your own mind the rating of pain to this description as it's given by the injured worker. And remember, our categories are minimal, slight, moderate, and severe. Okay, so this is an example of sample dialogue. And this is the doctor speaking now. Doctor says, Mr. Smith, I'm going to ask you some questions about how your lower back and right leg pain affect your ability to do various activities. Now, these activities are termed activities of daily living, and these are activities that you would do on a daily basis as you go about your day. The first of these categories is self-care and personal hygiene. I'm going to ask you some questions about self-care and personal hygiene. Now, Mr. Smith, do you have any problems with being able to manage your own self-care and personal hygiene? Mr. Smith: oh yes, I have trouble doing most everything. With my pain, I can barely function. Doctor: okay. I'm going to give you a list of various self-care and personal hygiene activities, and I want you to tell me if or how your lower back and right leg pain interferes with your ability to care for yourself, okay? Okay. Okay, considering urination. Mr. Smith, do you have any problem using the bathroom for urination? Mr. Smith: no, I can urinate fine. Doctor: Mr. Smith, do you have any problem using the bathroom for defecating? Mr. Smith: no, I can defecate fine. Sometimes, though, because of my pain, I have trouble wiping myself because of the twisting. Doctor: I understand. Do you wipe yourself, or do you have to get help with this? Mr. Smith: oh yeah, I wipe myself. Doctor: Mr. Smith, do you have any problem with brushing your teeth, combing your hair, or bathing? Mr. Smith: yes, it hurts my lower back and my right leg to bend over the sink to brush my teeth, and when I shower, it hurts to bend over to wash my feet. Doctor: I understand. Can you brush your teeth by yourself? Oh yeah. If my back is hurting, I just do it standing up instead of bending over. Can you wash your feet? Oh yeah. I just put one foot up on the ledge and bend over to do it that way. Doctor. Got it. Doctor. Mr. Smith, do you have any problem dressing yourself? Mr. Smith. Yes. I have a lot of lower back and right leg pain with putting on my pants and my shoes and socks. Doctor. Did you dress yourself in coming here to this evaluation? Yes. Doctor. Mr. Smith, because of pain in your lower back and right leg, do you have any problem with eating? Mr. Smith. Well, kind of. I have pain with sitting down to eat a meal. Doctor. Are you missing meals? Have you lost weight? Mr. Smith. No. I guess I'm not missing any meals. Doctor. Uh-huh. Doctor. Mr. Smith, can you think of any other examples of how your lower back and right leg pain interferes with your ability to handle your own self-care and personal hygiene? Mr. Smith. No, that's about it. Now, this would be an example of minimal pain because the pain in the lower back and right leg, however constant, however severe, and however impairing it's felt to be by the examinee, it does not really interfere with the ability to perform the activities. In this case, we're talking about self-care activities. Now, this is a valuable insight, and I repeat this procedure with each of the activities of daily living categories right down through the list. With communication, does the pain interfere with the ability to write? Does it interfere with your ability to type? Does it interfere with your ability to see? Does it interfere with your ability to hear? Does the pain interfere with your ability to speak? Does the pain interfere with any other communication activities or in any other way with your ability to? Does the pain interfere with physical activity functions? Does it interfere with the ability to stand? Does it interfere with the ability to sit? Does it interfere with the ability to recline? Does it interfere with the ability to walk? Does it interfere with the ability to climb stairs? Now, in the case of lower back with right leg radiculopathy, you could expect that your examinee would give you some descriptions of pain with standing, with sitting, with reclining, with walking, with climbing stairs, etc., with other physical activities. The question becomes, does the pain interfere with the ability to perform the activity? Can you stand? Can you sit? How long can you walk? How many stairs can you recline? You want to get a sense of how the pain interferes with the ability to perform the activities of daily living, while in your mind you assign a category of minimal, moderate, or severe. Similarly, with sensory functions, does the pain interfere with your ability to hear, to see, to feel, to taste, to smell? Does the pain interfere with your non-specialized hand activities of grasping, of lifting, of tactile discrimination? Does the pain interfere with your ability to travel, to ride as a passenger, to drive a car, to fly as a passenger in an airplane? Does the pain in any way interfere with other travel activities? Does the pain interfere with sexual function, Mr. Smith? Now, in the case of men, sexual function, normal male sexual function includes ejaculation and erection. Does the pain in any way interfere with normal male function of erection and ejaculation? For women, normal female sexual function is lubrication and orgasm. Does the pain in any way interfere with those activities? Other activities that your examinee may report is that they may report that they have pain with various positions of sex. The question then becomes, okay, are you able to have sex? Does the pain interfere with your ability to have sex? Many times in your workers will say, well, no, I just have to be careful, or I just have to modify positions. And so that would be an example of minimal impact of the condition on the ability to perform activities of daily living. Does the pain interfere with your sleep? Are you able to get restful sleep? Do you have a normal sleep pattern? Do you have daytime sleepiness? Now, this procedure helps immeasurably to assist in translating the examinee's descriptions of pain into something that we, as qualified medical evaluators, can work with. And I recommend that this assessment of activities of daily living be done with each examinee. And I recommend that it be done in the face-to-face interview rather than by means of a pre-completed form that's simply filled out by the examinee in either a checkbox or fill-in-the-blank format. Because you're after evidence of how the reported symptoms, in this example was symptoms with the lower back and the right leg, we're after evidence of how the symptoms actually impact or impair the activity. And the AMA Guide's 5th edition defines impairment as, quote, a loss or loss of use or derangement of any body part, any organ system, or organ function. And this is found on page 2 of the guides. And also it defines impairment by stating that, quote, an impairment may lead to functional limitations or the inability to perform activities of daily living. And in the example above, the lower back and right leg pain, they don't really or only minimally do they impair the daily living activities of self-care and personal hygiene. So this discussion and this description is given to you to be a practical tool that you can use to translate what it is that your injured worker is telling you into language that you can then use as the qualified medical evaluator in coming up with the conclusions, particularly as relates to permanent impairment. And I hope this has been a valuable exercise for you.
So doctors, I hope this helps you. Probably as important in your face-to-face evaluation with the examinee is your activities of daily living assessment. And typically the activities of daily living assessment alone, not considering the obtaining of the social history and not considering working interactively with the examinee on the symptom questionnaires, but simply the face-to-face interaction and discussing the various categories of activities of daily living. And this typically takes about 20 to 30 minutes in the face-to-face evaluation. So the very best qualified medical evaluators place as much emphasis on obtaining accurate findings on the activities of daily living assessment as they place upon finding accurate findings in the physical examination. Because both of those, the physical examination findings and your findings on your activities of daily living assessment, both of those are going to contribute to your opinion either for or against permanent impairment for the examinee. And even before the examinee gets to permanent impairment consideration, it may impact your opinions even on AOE COE in a denied case. So the activities of daily living assessment and your casual observation of the examinee and your insight into the examinee's life outside of the examination room through the obtaining of a good and accurate social history is critical in arriving at opinions and conclusions on the particular case and on the particular disputed issues that are accurate. So it's all about being truthful, and it's all about being accurate, and it's all about serving all of the parties simultaneously properly, and we can only do that. It can only be done one way, and that is by providing opinions and conclusions that are accurate. Okay? So a couple take-home messages regarding the activities of daily living assessment. Always ask yourself, what's objective here? What's objective here? See, the examinee will bring to you all kinds and manner of subjectivity, but through all of the subjectivity, always ask yourself, what's objective here? And this will give you much useful information. Also, obtain a good social history and question the examinee about the various activities that they do on a typical day. And many times examinees will be vague and somewhat elusive about the activities that they engage in a typical day, but you want to pursue the examinee's day almost on an hour-by-hour basis, like a dog on a bone, questioning the examinee to find out, outside of the examination room, where there are no cameras and there are no oversight committees and there are no judgments and opinions being formed about the examinee, how are they able to perform under those circumstances compared to their descriptions and their presentations to you during the face-to-face evaluation. Always work interactively on symptom questionnaires to arrive at opinions and conclusions that are truthful and accurate and a true representation of the examinee's actual condition on the day of your evaluation. And then finally, in my opinion, the activities of daily living assessment must be done interactively in the face-to-face evaluation. And you can expect examinees to either underreport or overreport their limitations with activities of daily living. And the reason we have you, the reason we hire you, your job is to provide us, as the readers of your report and the parties involved with your report, with some semblance of the truth. So you are the translator between the examinee and the readers of your report. And we rely on you to provide a report that, despite what the examinee may say, you are the translator and you are the party responsible for bringing to the readers of your report truthful and accurate opinions, conclusions, and determinations. And that's the very reason that we hired you as a qualified medical evaluator. So doctors, I hope this helps you. In our next session, we're going to conclude this program on the QME's crystal ball by very briefly talking about how to obtain truthful and accurate opinions on permanent impairment and apportionment. And we're a little bit short on time in this program, so I'm going to hit the salient and highlighted points on each of those categories, which will help you arrive at permanent impairment ratings that are truthful and accurate and a true representation of the examinee's condition, and also apportionment determinations that are also accurate. Okay, so this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I want to thank you for joining me on today's session. Look forward to being with you on our very next session as well. And for now, I'm wishing you best of success in your career as a qualified medical evaluator.